Meanwhile, here at home, some fearing federal ICE agents could potentially raid classrooms to arrest undocumented immigrants. It is part of President Trump's recent order allowing federal immigration officials to make arrests.
There is now so much fear in New York City that local officials are conjuring up ways to hide people from ICE. One of which involves making the locations of New York City's asylum shelters a complete secret. But doing this would make New York more than just a sanctuary city that doesn't care about one's immigration status. Instead, it would force our entire city to harbor the gang members and criminals ICE has come here to arrest.
Law enforcement officials are keeping a close eye on gang-related criminal activity all around the city. The NYPD's Detective Bureau is tracking the dangerous Venezuelan gang Tranter.
They call this place the death shelter, said Angel. He was placed here at Randall's Island, but says from the moment he walked in, people told him to watch his back. Migrants we spoke to say they sleep with one eye open, fearing they will be attacked.
Police say their crimes are becoming more brazen. The members even posting their weapons on social media. I mean, look at this picture.
Originally from Venezuela, the gang has infiltrated city shelters, running illegal operations right under the noses of authorities. Randall's Island, where a large tent city has been set up to accommodate migrants, has become a recruitment hub for the gang.
There's actually a recruitment process, and this is the first time we've seen structure with Tranter Aragua, where people are recruiting these younger members.
As the Trump administration continues to crack down on undocumented immigrants and also make threats to anyone who might stand in the way, immigration advocates are saying that not enough is being done to protect this community.
Some of New York City's leaders want to make the disclosure of its asylum shelters illegal. But what none of those in favor of this new idea will admit is that it's just going to make New York the #1 location for gang members and fugitives to hide themselves in America, if it somehow isn't already. Because over the last year, the Venezuelan gang Tranter Aragua has been coming here en masse, setting up shop inside the very shelters New York City's laws mandate it operate. Like the infamous Roosevelt Hotel, which has over 1,000 rooms and serves as a shelter, immigrant welcome center, and a gang hideout, with criminals allegedly using this facility to plan and commit crimes all over town. Something they get away with because as a sanctuary city, New York bans police from entering and patrolling its shelters to keep them safe. And with gang members smuggling weapons inside food delivery bags right through their front doors, these places aren't just where criminals live, they're also where these gangs who specialize in human trafficking find new recruits and new victims to exploit. And even though many of these well-known facilities are slated for closure in the coming months, any new ones that open might be kept secret. Which brings us to the real reason hiding these places is such a bad idea. If terrible people like gang members and criminals and possible terror watch list suspects are living in them, hiding them from ICE is not only going to make our city more dangerous, but it's also going to help these criminals continue to ruin it, while putting local residents in imminent danger without them even knowing it. Because with New York being a sanctuary city with a unique right to shelter rule, anyone who asks for a shelter bed gets one because it's their right, even if they intend to sleep in it after spending time in the back of a police car for theft, robbery, or assault. However, if ICE knows where these shelters are, our progressive leaders are afraid they might set up camp and make arrests. But as you're about to see, our leaders, they don't just want our shelters hidden from ICE. Oh no, they also want them hidden from anyone who might object to them, which means they've got to hide them from their own voters. So this right here is the Roosevelt Hotel. It's the most prominent shelter in New York City. Outside you can see a police tow truck. They're towing what looks like an abandoned or illegal vehicle. There's some stuff inside of it, like a bandana and a bunch of garbage along with a hat. But look around, this entire area, it's nothing but offices. We're near Grand Central Terminal, and thus when this place was set up over 2 years ago, there wasn't the type of neighborhood pushback that we're now seeing in the Bronx while the city tries to open another shelter that people know about.
Staffers at City Hall faced a grilling in the South Bronx from neighbors upset about plans to open a brand new migrant shelter.
I'm living this. I'm seeing this. Things got worse when the mayor's chief of staff revealed the decision to open a 2,200-bed single men's shelter for newly arrived migrants was already a done deal.
So in the Bronx, the city plans to open a 2,200-person men's-only shelter, and neighbors are pretty concerned because they know that as a sanctuary city, no vetting is done before people are moved into some of these places, which is how they become so dangerous. And when you think about the impact criminal activity has on a neighborhood, look right here. Because this abandoned car with Massachusetts plates could be somewhere a person who's no longer allowed in this shelter is sleeping. It's happened before. But since there's nobody living in it, it also could be a stolen vehicle, which has been used to commit crime. And if you're a resident, the last thing you want is for a shelter to open up in your neighborhood and for it then to turn into a place that's always got police cars parked out in front of it. And even though the vast majority of people living in a place like this are not criminals and did not come here to join gangs, it only takes a small handful of people to ruin it for everybody because, again, criminals are protected here, which greatly magnifies what they can do. Something everyone saw when a facility similar to that coming to the Bronx opened on Hall Street in Brooklyn, housing 3,000 people, none of whom were vetted or went through background checks before moving in. In fact, last summer, after back-to-back gang-related incidents took place here, the city was forced to deploy an extra 14 police officers to the area in order to keep the peace. And people from the Bronx, they're not stupid. They know that this is coming to their area when that new shelter opens. Because New York is not a law and order city, and our police are prevented from doing their job inside these places, which would really benefit every community in town, including the people who live in these facilities. You've got families with little kids in some of these places. They don't want to live next to gang members. They don't want their families to be at risk, but they are, which makes you wonder who exactly is benefiting from these places.
What are we talking about? What's going on inside this hotel that is now spilling out into the Times Square area?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a recruitment process, and this is the first time we've seen structure with Tranter at Agua, where people are recruiting these younger members as young as 11, and they've been described as some of these.
So gangs, criminals, they're making themselves at home in facilities just like this one, and they're using them to grow their criminal empires and find new members. All of it for free. They don't have to pay to stay here. And of course, if you knew something like this was coming in your neighborhood, you would have questions, but our leaders, they don't want you to ask questions, so they want these places to now be kept a secret. So you see this car right here? It's got the yellow boot on it. The police are towing a whole bunch of vehicles in front of this hotel right now. This one over here has got the yellow device on the windshield. That's called a barnacle. You can't drive if you can't see. But this plan to hide asylum shelters, it's being done as a response to President Trump's immigration crackdown. And it says here, as the federal government does its job by arresting people, the city thinks its mandate is to protect all of those individuals, even if some of these new neighbors are gang members who are a security risk to the people they live near. But the most frightening aspect of all of this is that if shelter locations are kept secret, and if they continue to be a haven for criminals because of our sanctuary city policies, none of the residents who live near these places will be able to take necessary precautions. Look at this. Just a few months ago, articles came out about how the gangs living at the Roosevelt Hotel were committing crime in Times Square, which is nearby. And although there's definitely an argument here to keep the residents of these places free from harassment and from unnecessary intrusion in their lives, how much dignity and privacy do people lose when just the location of the shelter is made public? After all, taxpayers pay for it. It is publicly funded. Shouldn't people know where it is? If it's hidden and kept in the dark, how is anybody going to hold a place like this accountable for mismanagement? At the same time, the names of the individuals who live in these places, that's never released. And since many of these places are dual purpose as they offer services, there's no way to prove that someone who walks in the front door even lives there. If these places are hidden from the general public may end up being less safe.
This is the building right here that we're talking about on East 144th Street, right next to the Bruckner Expressway. And take a look around. This is not exactly a residential neighborhood. In fact, as you can see, it's surrounded by industrial buildings. The city detailed plans to offer 24-hour security.
So according to the television, people shouldn't be worried about security because this new facility opening in the Bronx is separated from the neighborhood near it by a highway and an overpass. But so are some of the city's other shelters, which have rather poor reputations for safety, like the facility on Hall Street. Street. It's almost identical in that it's a former co-working space on the other side of a highway and an overpass, under which police catch people doing all sorts of things that are against the law. On top of that, even though it's an industrial area, there are local businesses there, and many of them have reported an increase in crime. And the nearby grocery store to this facility was particularly hard hit, and apparently people were stealing from the grocery store while still wearing their IDs to let them back into the Hall Street shelter. And look, are most residents of these places criminals? No. However, the city's inability to safely manage them because of our sanctuary laws, that adds an element of danger to this entire equation that no progressive who wants to keep these places hidden will ever admit. And if our leaders are telling people to relax because the new shelter is by a highway overpass or in a non-residential area, they're either ignorant of what's going on at some of the other shelters like Hall Street, or they're deliberately concealing it. Because anybody who watches the news knows that this stuff is going on. Anybody who's walked over by the Hall Street shelter and who's seen the ambulances and the constant police cars knows something's wrong. But if you thought people living near one of these facilities may have something to worry about, wait until you hear what the non-gang members who actually live in them have to say about safety. So here we are at the Candler building. It's another one of the city's shelters, but it's already kind of a secret. It houses 400 men, and it's right here in the middle of Times Square, but the entrance, the main entrance right over here, they don't use that entrance. The back of the building is where all of the guests come and go. Unfortunately, you'll see there are some police cameras and lights set up. There's also large piles of trash back there which block the sidewalks. Perhaps they're moving furniture or things out of this facility. We don't know if it's slated to close yet. But this area where I'm standing is the location where 2 NYPD officers were first assaulted by members of this Tranter Aragua gang way back in December of 2023. And it was at that moment that the city started learning about the danger these gang members pose to all of us, especially those who have to live in these places.
18 people were arrested. They call this place the death shelter, said Angel. He was placed here at Randall's Island, but says from the moment he walked in, people told him to watch his back. Before something happens to me, I'd rather be somewhere else. I'm going to...
So look at that. The majority of people who live in these places, they're under attack, all right, but not from Donald Trump. They're under attack from gangs that shouldn't even be here in the first place. In fact, the best thing to happen to any shelter in town would be for ICE agents to raid it and remove every criminal who they find inside, because these are the very criminals assaulting the people in these places who the city says are vulnerable and who says we need to take care of. But now we've got local officials who want the locations of these places to be a secret. They're not advocating for ICE to go into them and remove the criminals. No, instead, they just want all the places we know about to close so that they can reopen new hidden facilities where these gang members have another advantage on everybody else. Really, if you're a gang member and you want to live someplace where the state is going to support your criminal activity, what more could you ask for? We're already releasing many of these folks when they commit robbery or assault, since those have been decriminalized. And when these gang members get caught with weapons, oftentimes the charges are dropped because apparently they've got no U.S. criminal record. And now these gang members might get the opportunity to hide from ICE, living in secret locations for free. If that happens, it's going to be even more of a public safety nightmare for people out on the streets and for the non-gang members who live in these facilities.
Originally from Venezuela, the gang has infiltrated city shelters, running illegal operations right under the noses of authorities. Gang members disguise themselves as food delivery workers, riding mopeds and carrying delivery bags filled with weapons, allowing them to commit crimes while hiding in plain sight.
So according to this report, the gang members masquerade as delivery drivers and use their delivery equipment that they'll carry when they're riding a bike to drop off food to smuggle weapons inside these facilities. And if this turns out to be true, it means that some of the bikes parked out behind this building could be used by criminals to commit crime. However, keeping the locations of publicly funded shelters a secret isn't the only way our local officials could frustrate ICE and stop them, or at least try to stop them. What they could do is, instead of having separate shelters for asylum seekers and homeless New Yorkers, some activists have put forth the idea of merging the two separate shelter systems into one. Then, if ICE were to raid a facility, after entering, they would find a mix of people, some who have immigrant immigration violations and others who are U.S. citizens. Right now, that's not how things work. And both of these ideas exist because activists just have this idea that consumes their mind that ICE is here to conduct mass deportations when that's not what they're doing, and that's not what they say they have any plans to do in the future.
Tranter uses fear tactics to strong-arm migrants into joining, threatening their families back home if they resist. For those who refuse, they're labeled enemies of the gang. The gang preys on vulnerable young migrants, forcing them into criminal activity. Many members are
Why do we want to pay for people like this to secretly live in our city while ruining it? Do our leaders really hate the new president that much that they'd be willing to fund a criminal enterprise that's growing right here, ruining life for all of us? Especially the people who they live near in these facilities. These gangs like Tranter, they're human exploiters. And once they enter these places, they start looking around at how they can use the human capital they're surrounded by to benefit them. Forcing people to commit crimes, shoplift, rob people, and forcing others to sell stolen products on the sides of the street. Who's gonna protect the immigrants that live in these shelters from the immigrant gangs that are living in them as well? Has anybody ever thought about that? Because ICE could sure protect them. They would get rid of the criminals. And if our leaders were really concerned about protecting vulnerable immigrants, they'd cooperate with ICE. They would turn over these gang members. And you know something? New York could be the safest big city in America for immigrants, but it doesn't want to be. Instead, it wants to be the safest place for criminals, which is why it's helping them and why our leaders now want to keep the locations of places where criminals might live a complete secret. What do you think about that? Is that a good idea? Let me know. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.